welcome to the M Word YouTube channel. We're doing a little bit of an introduction around mental health, the difficulties in and around not being able to go to school, struggling with mental health breakdowns, which of course nobody really wants to talk about. And I'm joined by a really lovely guest. You are going to love her without doubt. She's very vibrant, she's very passionate, she's extremely enthusiastic. And between us, we're going to pull apart some interesting information around a case study of ours. So let me introduce you to Anna.
Yeah. And sometimes I put that off.
Yeah.
And then I have a cup of tea and I'll have a piece of toast and take a bit of time for myself. And then it's like, right, I'm ready now. Let's go and find out.
Yeah. And we don't really hear that side of the story, do we? Of a life story of when we're talking around risk. And I think it's also worth noting as well that, you know, you've had a lot of professionals in health involved, but it is so interesting because the only clinicians who are, one, trained to do the risk taking, and two, are actively interested in monitoring and observing and recording the risk. Believe it or not, there's only one trade, and that is mental health nurses. You've got clinical psychologists. They might do a risk assessment, but they're so risk averse. They will not provide any form of therapy if they think their client is too risky. And yet, a mental health nurse is expected to go in there every single time and mentally, in their own mind, do a risk assessment and note it. And I find it very intriguing. We know that autism is associated with anxiety because of the environment. But as the anxiety continues to build and then it becomes quite chronic, that we have low mood, you know, we're really actively talking about mental health deterioration. And yet schools do not employ mental health nurses. We don't actively talk about mental health in a way that we should do. We do pay a lot of lip service within education about mental health. We even highlight Mental Health Awareness Day, but we're not actively talking about mental health and how we can support one another when we start to see very, very early signs of poor mental health breaking down, because most people don't know what it looks like. So we're not talking about it enough to be able to get in there and prevent it enough. And then when it becomes so extreme, we always think, right, well, we'll call an educational psychologist, and they are not going to be able to assess the risk. An OT will not assess the risk. You know, a speech and language therapist will not assess the risk. So it seems very bizarre how we kind of try and avoid the very person who could come in and support. It just seems a little strange to me.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, yes. I mean, psychiatrists, clinical psychologists, occupational therapists, speech and language therapists, that's been our bread and butter, really. Yeah.
But a psychiatrist is brought in for the medication aspect and effectively doing a mental health section. You know, they are so expensive as a resource. Actually, even when you have a psychiatrist who is prescribing, you won't be monitored effectively weekly or fortnightly by them. It is down to, guess who? The mental health nurse, because they are infinitely cheaper to be able to go and assess and feed back to the psychiatrist.
That's really interesting, because when they were 8 and we had that first really significant mental health breakdown, she was seen by a psychiatrist weekly for quite a considerable amount of time. I couldn't, months. No mental health nurse at all. So think of the expense of that. And the outcome.
But that's interesting again, because that psychiatrist will have clearly felt the risk was too high to kind of go, actually, I want to be on top of this. Because at the end of the day, if you're then having to deal with a coroner, what are you going to turn around and say?
Especially at 8.
Especially at 8.
And it was high.
Yeah.
It was really high. And they were toying also, you know, the only thing they could think was to use antipsychotics at 8.
It's very
And
young, isn't
we we didn't we would have done if we had to, but we didn't want to because this was environmental.
it? Yeah,
You know, to medicate with psychotics because a system around a young person is failing didn't seem the right thing to do. So we avoided that.
yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah.
So going forward then, what led you to come and seek out a mental health nurse?
Well,
We have everybody
hmm,
involved,
this
you
cycle
know.
really, and you know, this cycle hasn't ended. You know, we had the breakdown at 16, then another one at 17, and then we did have a fairly um good period of stability and towards recovery. Um, and they stayed at school till 19, so had an extra year at school, which really help that.
Yeah,
But at 19, they had to leave school. They couldn't stay any longer. It was, you know, it they needed to leave so anyway, but it wasn't possible to stay. And we did everything we could. She'd been there residentially since 11, so we knew it was going to be a big move. But we moved home over near school. She spent the whole of the last year of school just as a day student, coming home every night to sleep, but um, spending time in the daytime in school every day to try and avoid any cliff edge, because we know cliff edges are really, really problematic. Um, and left in the summer of the end of year 14 and continued with they'd been doing an alternative education provision package at school for that last year, and so we just continued that through an EOTAS package. So it was that bit was very seamless. You know, or we did everything we could to make it seamless, but there was another very significant mental health breakdown, which was even more dramatic, really, in the March of that year. So quite a long time afterwards. And it had been feeling very, very manic, increasingly manic for quite a long time. Um, and it was the riskiest ever. Um, and it was almost like an illustration of how, you know, the containment of the school had just gone. You know,
yeah,
the way
yeah,
it erupted was just totally uncontained. Um, and it became really, really clear to me, crystal clear, that things couldn't go on. You know, we were only heading one way. And it's really hard for a mum to do, but you know, I accepted that she might not live into old age. And I also accepted that she has a right not to live into old age. It's her life. She has a right. But the difficult thing is that she would always tell us that she wants to live. It's just in the moment when those emotions are so strong, she can't think of any way to manage them. That's the only time that she doesn't want to live. So it almost felt to me as if she does die, it will always be accident, not suicide, because this is
yeah,
someone that's very clearly saying, I want to live, but I can't. Sometimes I can't manage the feelings within me. And at that point, the only way to stop the feelings is to die.
yeah,
And that's what's driven me, really. We've got a great team around us, but again, you know, the people you're talking about, and we have had an occupational therapist who has been amazing and has told us who has really held us. Um, but told us very straight, I am not the right person to be doing this. I'm doing it. I'm stepping in to do what I can. And she's helped us. We've had long periods of time open to adult mental health, and she has helped us really try and hold adult mental health to account and get the support we need from adult mental health. But it just isn't available. What we need isn't available. And I knew I kind of had some vague thoughts all coming together that we're getting near the end of last chance. It's almost like a lot of thoughts were coming together in my head, and it felt like we really were reaching the end of the road. And it's quite late, really, 2021, and adult mental health was starting to talk about a personality disorder diagnosis. I think that was a big trigger, because I did some research around personality disorder diagnoses and talked to people about personality disorders, and could see, absolutely see that this is where we were heading, but really felt that she hadn't been given a chance to not develop a personality disorder, because we'd been asking for many, many, many years for therapeutic intervention. I really was really clear with people that it couldn't be tagged on to my young person as a island. It had to be for us. We need, and I talked to, this will make you laugh maybe. I talked to adult mental health about this and said, we need some family work. And they gave us one session with the family therapist.
Only one? Why only one?
I guess because I was quite difficult and I'd asked for it, and they were ticking the box. That's my only guess. I mean, you know, but we needed it. It couldn't happen to us in isolation as individuals. It had to be something therapeutic that supported us to find a different way to be together as a as individuals within a family dynamic, a dynamic that was working together, that was supporting each other, but also holding each other back and also playing into old cycles. So that wasn't coming. And so I just knew, I suppose in my heart of hearts, I knew we had a chance. I felt we had a chance, but also I have always I've never lost that belief that we can get through this, that what my young person's looking for, which is as independent a life as possible, is possible. I've never stopped believing that through everything.
Yeah.
And so that drove me as well. And I did research, then I researched, I looked what was out there. And it's really difficult to find, actually, it's really difficult to find that sort of therapeutic support. It's really easy to find assessments, but we've had assessments coming out.
Yeah.
I mean, we've probably killed forests in the assessments. We didn't want assessments, but I didn't know what we did want. And because I work in the special educational needs arena, I had seen your work before, which you wouldn't know about. But because I case work for children and support parents, I had seen quite a few pieces of work, or had seen some information around the piece of work you've done with young people before, of all different ages. And it, after doing a bit more research, it seemed that you might be able to provide the knowledge and the experience, um, along with the flexibility and and depth of intervention that we might need. And I didn't know what we needed. I needed to find someone that I could just hand that over to and say, we'll give it a go. Um, and that's what we've done, and that's what you've done with
Mm.
us.
So let's think about the assessment. Do you remember what that was like?
Yes.
Go on then, tell us, because
Well,
there was a lot of fear still, I feel, around the young person. The young person wasn't able to attend the mental health assessment. And I don't know if you remember, but you stressed this young person has been through so many assessments. We can't keep doing this.
mm,
And one of the things that I know that parents bitterly complain about, as do clients in the past, is that, I have to repeat myself all the time.
mm,
And you felt very strongly that you could not subject yet another assessment. So you and I had to do this between us. Do you remember?
mm. I do.
When you came to the assessment, how hopeful were you? Be honest, because obviously you've been through a lot by now.
I wasn't really. I wasn't
Right.
really. In fact, I daren't be hopeful.
Yeah.
You know, you, I daren't, because I've never lost that belief that they can do it, but I have lost all hope in the moment, because I think there's a number of reasons. One, self-protection. I've been
Yeah.
there. Two, to have them go through that sort of 4-year period and 2 years settling into a residential special school, for the last 2 years to absolutely fly and then be right back to square one with bells on, has taught me not not to expect
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
anything really other than what happened, just let it happen and deal with
Mm.
it. Um, and the other thing that I'm really mindful of, and I don't know how common this is for other people's experiences, but my young person is phenomenally um, emotionally intuitive, almost to levels of gift. um, and so if I become hopeful and then disappointed, they will pick up on that, and that will induce feelings of failure in them. So if I don't ever become hopeful, I can't ever become disappointed, and that can't ever project onto them into another failure, and in their um, tally of failures that they've inflicted on themselves and their family.
Yeah.
So I think there's twofold to it, really. I've learned as a parent to be to control emotions.
Mm. So, how was the experience of the mental health assessment? Because obviously, you've had the experience of CAMS. So, here is an opportunity to compare, but also the adult mental health you've had experience
Mm,
of. So,
mm,
here's
mm.
another opportunity to compare CAMS with adult mental health and CAMS with me. So, how did you find the mental health assessment?
It was it was it was really different for a number of reasons from any experience that I've had with mental health assessments before, and we have done a lot. Um, and we were at a really bad time at that point as well. Really bad. Risks were really high.
Yeah.
Um, and my only strategy at that point was to say, right, next time it happens, I'm just going to wash my hands of it. I just have to, because I'm just allowing a failure of service to carry on by being the mum that will always step in and do the mum will. It's just allowing it's allowing the failure to carry on. So that was my only strategy at that point, was the next time just be like, over to you, A&E. No, not coming home. No, not being in the risk assessment. No, not getting involved, and make services take responsibility, which I wasn't confident in any way, shape or form, but that's where I was. So it was really hard, but the things that were different were I didn't feel a reaction from you. I felt you took it seriously, but I didn't feel that this isn't something I can solve. So, I just need to listen and then look to close. That I feel elsewhere, certainly from adult mental health. And I'm told from adult mental health, we can't medicate for this. It doesn't have a diagnosis that we open to.
Mm.
So we'll sit with you until the crisis is reduced a bit and then we'll close. I didn't get that feeling, just that it was like, oh, it's one of these difficult ones, or it's one of these ones we don't have the resources for. It just was all, yeah, okay, that's how it is, but equally not in a belittling way, because the other thing I find from services is there's really high peaks and troughs for my young person. So they function very highly in some areas of life, and at some points in life they're very articulate, which has its pros because they tell professionals how it is, so they can't ignore it, but they're very articulate. They have some amazing qualifications. They work part-time in a very responsible, practical job. They drive a car independently.
Mm.
And there's not a lot of functioning in the middle, or in fact, I would often say no functioning in the middle. There are some real extreme difficulties in daily functioning.
Yeah.
And it's very easy for professionals to just pick on that. Well, they go to work. What more could we ask for? Off you go on your way. Or they drive a car. People with those levels of difficulties aren't able to drive a car. It's our job is done here, kind of thing. I didn't get that either. A focus on either the hopeless. Sometimes professionals focus on the hopelessness. We can't do anything, it's too hopeless. Or sometimes they focus on the positives and say we can't do anything because it's not necessary.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel that at all. I didn't feel anxiety from you. That's the other thing I feel from professionals. Because of how extreme and escalating the incidents are, it not only is the situation, or has the situation escalated to the point where there's been situations that are dangerous for my young person, but those situations have potentially could have caused danger to members of the public inadvertently. And that seems to bring about new anxiety levels in professionals. And I didn't feel that from you, because that's just it's awful, it's horrific, I hate it, but it's just our normal lived experience. And feeling anxiety back from a professional is really hard. And I think as a parent, we're really used to hearing back that anxiety. This is why I can't talk about it. I can't go out for coffee with my friends, as much as they would like me to be able to unburden myself. I can't really go into the details other than say things have been really bad, as bad as you can imagine and worse. And I don't want to talk about it anymore, because I find that if I do go into details of any more than that, it upsets them, it shocks them, because they don't really live a life where this level of risk happens. And to think of it happening to me and my child upsets them. So, and that's very difficult for me in that I'm not only dealing with my life and my child, but I'm also dealing with now the anxiety and the upset that I've caused a friend. And it's not helpful for me to be, I've just gone out for a coffee to forget about all that, not to then be
Yeah.
mopping up my friend's tears.
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel a little bit like that from professionals, that I go into details and I get an anxiety response back from them.
Yeah.
And that's really not helpful. I didn't feel that at all. I just felt that it was very non-judgmental, very calm, but not in a dismissive way. You just held it. You held what I was telling you.
Mm. Yeah.
And I think the thing that surprised me most,
There's more.
yeah, the thing that surprised me absolutely most was after I told you everything, and I told you everything, you still wanted to work with us. I mean, that's not a reaction I'm used to. I'm used to, once I've told people everything, them finding 6 million reasons why working with me is not necessary.
Yes. I think the thing is, it's a very complex case that we're discussing. It's an amazing case study. It is so wide in its variety, but it just reiterates how complex this is. I suppose what frustrates me is that it's very quick to kind of have professionals saying it's so big and it's so cumbersome with its complexities. We don't know what to call it, so we'll just come up with a label called borderline personality disorder or emotionally unstable. And yet, what has clearly not happened is nobody has really looked at all of the history, looked at all of the difficulties, looked at all of the challenges to kind of come out with a different understanding. And I know that my understanding was quite different from a lot of the other professionals you had spoken with. And when we thought about the initial screening, there were still difficulties because we had some indicators from the assessment that kind of thought we need to know a bit more. We're not going to know that until we do the initial screening. But we also then had to think about how do we support this young person coming through that initial screening and playing a very pivotal role in help us understand some of this nitty gritty. And that was quite difficult, wasn't it? Because we had to, well, you had to go back to, this lovely young person who was in real dire straits of this could potentially be a last hope. We've got to find somebody who can just help us. So do you want to talk about that bit? Because we
Yeah.
obviously did that bridging, didn't we, between the mental health assessment and the initial screening?
Yeah. And that's quite hard because when with me being at that point and also them being at that point, taking that, putting that trust in somebody else or something else is quite a risk, because it's the it it opens up the potential of failure, doesn't it?
Yes.
As well as success. It opens up the potential of both. And that was really hard. And I think that's taken a long time to bridge. And maybe that's partly what the first piece of work has been about, because I feel like we've really got there now. Um, um, but it was it was huge, but I just knew we had to do it. I just knew it's irrational, but I just knew we had to do it. In my mind, we hadn't got anything to lose, because the way we were heading was not to a good outcome. It was to one of a few really poor outcomes, lifelong poor outcomes. So in my mind, we didn't have a lot to lose. And I think my young person felt that as well. I know they were very, very, very guarded to begin with, more, much more guarded than me. But that's because I got a lot more trust in my ability to manage my emotions. They don't trust themselves to manage their emotions, so the only protection that they've got is to be incredibly guarded, and they were incredibly guarded. Um, but I knew, I knew this had a really good chance of success by about week 3 or 4 of them meeting you, because they were meeting you.
Mm.
And that was new. Usually, um, because they have been offered quite a lot of therapeutic work over the years at their residential special school, but all totally in isolation to them, nothing to us as a family, no involvement with us at all. I don't even know what went on. But because of the level of risk, again, the clinical psychologist at school would offer weekly sessions. CBT, I understand from my young person, they were based around CBT, but they wouldn't turn up, because it wasn't, I guess it wasn't right, for whatever reasons,
Mm.
would forget to go, not turn up, even when reminded, somehow manage to forget or lose track of time on the way between A and B and not arrive, and engage just enough, kind of play this game of engaging just enough to not have it shut down, to keep it still there as a bit of a safety net, but not ever engage enough or routine enough um, for any sort of relationship to build. And that was different.
Mm.
The
Go on.
Because they turned, and I could gauge it because of how much shoehorning is needing from me to make it happen. So I'm the person that can gauge how much engagement is. And really from session 3, really, they've
Yeah.
been they've prioritized it. They've and their organizational skills are poor. They haven't turned up on the right day at the right time always, to say the least.
Mm.
But they haven't been going through the motions, and they haven't been doing it to please me.
One of the things, to kind of end this particular program, as it were, one of the things that I want you and I to convey to the others is there was a time gap between the mental health assessment and the initial screening,
Yeah.
and there was an even bigger time gap between the initial screening and the therapy starting.
Starting. Yes.
Do you remember that?
Yes. Yes.
Can you talk about that? Because one of the things that we forget in a mental health breakdown is the difficulty in trusting professionals again, that there could be a different outcome. You've got an experience, it wasn't brilliant. So why should you trust Lavinia? Why go with them? So I think you had to do quite a lot of the background work
Mm,
between Christmas and March. And
mm,
it's
mm.
quite a lengthy time.
It was. And there was all sorts. It was almost like a 360 going on around that, because we were still open to adult mental health. And the team that support my young person in their education, um, and adult mental health were working totally separately. And they were very keen to bring adult mental health into the team and have a conversation with adult mental health. And the 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 group working around my young person in their education, the professional group, felt that once they'd met adult mental health would be able to offer something useful. So that was going on in the background at the same time. That meeting happened, and adult mental health explained in no uncertain terms that this was not their remit and they wouldn't be offering anything. And their plan was to close the case. So I think that was quite a provoker. And that could have gone either way, couldn't it? But I think my young person was improving in their health. Their health was improving to the point where that could have been really difficult when they were still very unwell, but they weren't. They were a lot better. Um, and that gave them a bit of a motivation almost, really, that all of these people that I'm working with that know me, believe in me, this one, they think this is the gate to help me achieve this, and it's closed. And I think there was a bit of it, that was a bit of a turning point, because I think they were like, well, I'm kind of not having that. That's not okay. The other thing was that what adult mental health did offer was referral to the complex needs service. And the complex needs service is the service for people with diagnosed or suspected personality disorders. And it's the way it's set up is something that my young person couldn't access, straight in to group therapy once a week in the city 20 miles away from where we live. I mean, it's inaccessible for somebody with the difficulties that they've got, the mixed complex difficulties that they've got. So what was being offered was so far removed from something that they felt they could engage with. I think that was quite provoking for them. And I think that time period between December and March gave them a long time to process that, and whether to see that as a negative or whether to see that with a bit of a I'm not having that. And we started to get a little bit of the I'm not having that. And also we had conversations. I had conversations with them, and we had conversations with each other where we unpicked it, and we're just like, do we want to do this? It was very much do we want to do this? Do we want to leave ourselves open for this? But what's the choice? What have we got to lose?
It's also worth noting as well that in the other part of the team, as it were, there was a counsellor, and it was quite intriguing because the counsellor only
I'd forgotten about that.
The counsellor only works 3 weeks out of 4. So every fourth week, our young person had no support. So if there was a major crisis in that week, it was all back on you.
I'd forgotten about that, the counsellor, because also, yes, and I suppose those are the sticking plasters that we tried, and the counselling is useful. Talking therapy is useful for my young person, but it just kind of keeps a lid on things. It doesn't resolve anything. It just keeps a lid on things. And the counselling, again, the counselling worked totally in isolation. And the counsellor was definitely quite scared of anything outside of my young person, because the confidentiality, because she's very open, to saying, I'm happy for you to communicate with this person about this or this person about this. And she has capacity to be able to be very clear and very direct about that. But that the counsellor wasn't happy with that. And I think the counselling is a classic example of worked very much like this the CBT had done at school, that she was just engaging enough to keep it open, but she was also only turning up for, one session out of 3. And with the counsellor only turning up for one session out of 4, that wasn't an awful lot of sessions happening, but just enough to keep it there. And it's almost like it's like a safety net.
Yeah.
But it was petering out. It wasn't doing what was needed. And I think she knew that. And we did talk. The other thing we talked about was what hard work this was going to be. And that it wasn't going to be easy. it was going to be really hard work, and was now the right time to take on that hard work? Were
Yeah.
we both ready for that? Was practically, emotionally, was it a time to take on it? And it was. So that was an interesting conversation, because there wasn't anything that was standing in the way, really. We have got a year, and we did say we carved out a year mentally for this.
Yeah.
And I think the paperwork that we had from you initially made that very clear, that this was not a quick
Quick fix.
quick fix. It's not like 6 weeks and I'll wave you on your way. Yeah, it was clear that it was going to be a long haul.
Mm. We're going to end this session just talking about what we made a plan of. And
Yeah.
obviously, the next session will explore the first stage. But our plan, I felt, needed a lot of very careful thinking about, because one of the things that was number one on our hit list of having to think about was the risk. The risk was so high, very unpredictable. When people in the past had seen this young person as maybe coping or improving, everybody backed off thinking this is great. And we knew that actually we need to be nailing on that, right on top of that, knowing that that was probably the most risky times going. So risk was number one. But number two, we also wanted to work in collaboration. So obviously you've had your one-off session with family therapy, but what we wanted to consider was, were we able to work as a mini team with those very few people around? So family members, you, another family member, but also the carer
Mm-hmm.
and the counsellor, who then decided to back out. And then we had the MDT.
Mm-hmm.
So we were very clear about, we needed to have this really open and honest kind of commitment going forward, but we also wanted to be able to draw on our MDT for their expertise in their respective fields. But we needed the core team to be willing to meet as often as possible, allowing me to kind of doing what I call the collie dog syndrome. I go around herding my sheep into a pen. But this allowed us to think about how we could keep the risks at an all-time low. Everybody was kept up to date. If we felt there was a risk, if there were concerns, we could keep it up to date. And I wondered if you could just convey how you felt that was. Was it useful? Did you feel it was a really good, strong assertion on our part?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I didn't fully understand at that point how it was going to work, why
Yeah.
it was working that way, or how it was going to work. But what I did feel was contained by it. For the first time ever, really, I felt that I was just a player in it, and that somebody else was holding it. And that isn't how I felt in other situations, through all our experiences with CAMHS and adult mental health, is either like an equal partner sometimes, or the person who knows what needs to happen, is driving it, the person who's actually driving it. And I didn't feel either of those two things. And I felt that I was rightly just a part of it, just a mum and a part of it. And I think that's quite important. Um, because it's that is that's where I should be, just a big part, because I hold a lot of information and a lot of lived experience, a lot of history, and also, I live in the same house as my young person, so I have a view on a lot of stuff. But I am just a small part. I'm not the central part, and it can all, when you've got a very complex child or young person, it can all focus too much on the parent.
Mm.
Um, and I think that was useful, that I was just able to allow it the space to become what it needed to become from you,
Mm.
so that you could collie dog. And I think that was probably also quite powerful for my young person, for us just to embark on something kind of on a level.
Mm.
Neither of us really understood it. Neither of us understood where it was going to end up. Neither of us understood how it was going to end up, but we were going to give it a go. Um,
I suppose what I liked about it was we actually had the opportunity and the flexibility to actually be able to carry this out,
mm,
because a lot of people on the Otis package don't get that luxury.
yeah,
It's very much, what is the greater need? Speech and language, right? You can have that, but you can't have anything else. Or you might have cross combination of OT and speech and language, but certainly not a mental health nurse.
yeah,
And a mental health nurse, very often when I'm doing the Otis packages, I, as the mental health nurse, insist that I take the lead.
yeah,
Because if anxiety is the biggest barrier, it doesn't matter whether you have OT or speech and language. If you can't get that anxiety down, how on earth can they do their jobs? And with respect to their professional qualifications and training, they are not trained to deal with anxiety. They are trained to deal with their respective roles. And I would never want to try and impose on them their skill set and assume that I could do it. So I would respect the same.
yeah, 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 yeah.
This is
That's
my daily work.
that's that's true. I think that's true. And right back to when my young person was 16 and this new cycle of mental health breakdown started, her case officer at the local authority, that her EHCP case officer, said repeatedly in annual reviews and to me, the missing link at the table is health. The missing link at the table is health. But where local authorities seem much more open when that missing link within health is OT or speech and language, to look privately for that when it's not available, that doesn't seem to be on the radar with mental health support in the same way. That's
Yet again,
interesting.
mental health is given the lowest rankings.
Yeah, that
And
is interesting.
it
Yeah.
shouldn't be. It should be at the top of the rankings, so it is interesting. But nevertheless, it just meant that with your package, it could allow a great deal of flexibility and bringing a team together. One of the things that I was very clear on is the risk is so high. We absolutely have to be open, but we have to work as a team, because if we all understand the deterioration, whether you've seen it, whether I've seen it, and at the end of the day, I was the newest person coming in. So I had an awful lot to learn in the tiniest fraction of time, given how high the risks were. But again, that's back down to, my skill set. When you've been around doing an awful lot of A&E work, assessments, your speed needs to be really fast.
Mm,
You need to be able to assess really, really quickly and efficiently, but also support the wider team, because in A&E, at the end of the day, there's a bed queue and we want people in and out as quickly as possible, regardless of how suicidal they feel.
mm,
Hospitals are not designed to be holding pens for young people. But when you've got this situation, we're not dealing with any other professionals in A&E. They're not on tap resource. We don't even have a psychiatric CAMS unit. We've got us. Therefore, we absolutely have to have everybody's backs. We've got to look after each other. And so when I'm looking at the risk, it's much easier if I have somebody eyes on every single day throughout the week, helping me with their eyes and ears and observations. But when that becomes communication between all of us on a regular basis, information that we already know about has been missed by one person but was picked up by another, and I was being included, I'm then able to pick up the shortfall and go herding back and go, well, what about this? And I know that we're going to unfold this story. It's a very exciting story because it does begin to build momentum in a very different way. But how effective that came about because of our communication intertwined with each other.
Yeah.
So let's leave it there. We'll come back for our next episode.